Hello, Fiona.
Hi Warren, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good.
Good, excellent. So, we're going to talk about appreciative inquiry, and I think it'd be really helpful for people listening to hear about how we met, because it's quite an interesting story, I think, in the context of appreciative inquiry. Um, would you be kind enough to set the scene, and I'll chip in?
Yeah. So up until lockdown in March last year, I was the founding director of a consultancy called Fiona MacNeill Associates, and in January or February 2011-ish, I can't quite remember exactly, we were successful in a European tender to be the provider to Lancashire Care Foundation Trust of an appreciative leadership programme for their senior leaders across both the health side and also the kind of managerial and strategic side of the business. The programme ran for around 3 years with around 1,500 delegates. Lancashire Care Foundation Trust doubled in size at that point, so there was a lot of emergence around the programme, a lot of change, but the programme was built on the principles of really appreciative leadership, which is built on the principles of appreciative inquiry. So that's our connection in terms of today. And you came along, as I recall, to a session that my colleague Donata Kyra and I were running somewhere near the end of that rollout.
Yeah, so I'll pick it up from there. Yeah, so I managed to avoid going on the program successfully multiple times because I just took a new job as clinical director for children and family services. So I was kind of struggling to, navigate that learning curve. So it just felt like I had a huge amount to try and learn and understand. But equally, I wanted to do the course, but I came along at the end of it. In that period of time, obviously, there'd been a lot of talk about the program, and I'd heard that this very powerful character, Fiona MacNeill, ran the program. So I was fascinated to meet you on the day, and yeah, I turned up at that hotel in the countryside, wherever it was, near Blackburn, and I've been reflecting on it last night. Actually, I'm thinking that I didn't know really what to expect, but what I did experience was a really warm welcome and a really stimulating program. And I was thinking last night as well, I met loads of really fantastic clinicians and professionals that I've never met before, because it's an organization at the time with about 7 or 8 thousand people. So yeah, there was a lot of memories coming back to me last night when I reflected on the program.
I think what it can be when you work in the field that I do, what a lot of the work comes from a psychology underpin. So there can often be a pushback from people who are professionals in that area. And I think what I really recall was you and Donata and I sitting down at the end of the day around one of these big round tables at Stanley House, the hotel, and actually just having a conversation about how much we had valued the quality of your thinking. And you then saying, that's kind of what I also wanted to say to the two of you. So we had a moment of kind of synergy, as I recall it, um,
Yeah.
which I think was really interesting because that isn't always our experience from people that come from that professional psychology background. It often feels as if it's a bit of a pushback and let's see who knows more. And we had none of that. So
Yeah.
you were interested in how we had developed our thinking around stuff like transactional analysis, for example. The whole piece around the psychology of belonging that is very much connected to appreciative inquiry and powerful questions. And I think then what was really interesting was when you decided to set up on your own that you reached out and said, can you help me out here? And so we've got this relationship that I really value, and we're so very, very different.
Hmm.
And not that our public is hearing what happened before we came on to press the record button, but our conversation just before this really kind of, for me, brings to the fore how different we are, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I agree. But that's the thing about fantastic teams, isn't it? You know, when you find people that are complementary to you, you need difference, but you need balance at the same time. I agree with what you said about sometimes you get pushback from people. I think part of it is if you have a program that is regarded as mandatory, where, you know, you say to anybody they've got to do something and immediately try and find reasons why they should have autonomy and decide that it's their choice. But also, I think you're right. I think professionals like to think they're experts, and the sole repositories of knowledge when it comes to their field, and which is complete rubbish, because the more expert and specialist you get, I think the more siloed you get. So I think, you know, when I went on the program, it was perfect timing, because I got to take a step back, you know, and I got to hear from some other people, including yourselves as the facilitators of the program, but also from my colleagues, you know, hearing perspectives that I'd never heard, you know, from their day-to-day work. So yeah, there's a lot of richness in it, a lot of value in it, actually. So would that be a good point for me to then, let's get into this whole thing about appreciative inquiry. You know, what is it? What brought you to it? Tell us a bit about, you know, that, please, Fiona.
Okay. So it's more of a who brought me to it than what in the first instance, and it is our colleague in common, Donata Kyra, who brought it to the table at Fiona MacNeill Associates and said, I'm learning about this thing. I think she might have been doing some Gestalt training, or it might have been in amongst some stuff she was doing at Ashes. I can't remember, but she brought to the table, you know, to a team conversation, she brought to the table this concept around appreciative inquiry. And I remember just immediately thinking, asking good questions and listening to people, that feels like quite a bit of what we actually do. We very much had a reputation as having, you know, before the whole positive psychology movement became a big thing, we came from that positive base. We very much were about, well, what's possible, not about what's broken. We understood things were broken, but somehow we didn't want to do critical analysis on what broke it. And that's notwithstanding to say that critical analysis of things that break is not important, but in the world of development, I think we came through that conversational opportunity from the other side of that revolving door about what was possible. So Donata brought appreciative inquiry, and I am a natural learner, so then I had to get to mastery before I did anything with it. So we made a decision as an organisation to go and get proper development around appreciative inquiry. And we had the astonishing opportunity to commission Anne Radford, who actually had worked alongside David Cooper-Ryder, who was one of the main guys at Case Western that brought the model to the fore in the first instance. And we undertook our appreciative inquiry training with Anne in another country house hotel somewhere in Scotland, which I can't remember, except it was cold. And I think around February 2008. And it's always interesting when you go and you are being facilitated, when you are used to being the person doing the facilitation. And I remember really feeling the impact of the learning. So not just that cognitive piece where you were saying, okay, so I get that and I understand that goes with that and this goes with that and there's a process here and there's a theoretical underpin, and I kind of get all of that. But actually, because we were inquiring into the future of our organisation, really having some feelings based on what I was hearing from my colleagues that I hadn't had before. And noticing, on the one hand, how great that was, and on the other hand, actually, how uncomfortable I was. And I think that's quite an important thing to just bring to the fore, because I think there's a really bad advert for appreciative inquiry, that it's pink and fluffy and cuddly and there's no challenge around it. And well, with a West of Scotland consultancy, you're always going to get challenged, you know, no matter what the underpinning framework. You know, that's just a cultural thing. But absolutely, I was challenged by the space that Appreciative Inquiry gave for people to contribute, and the request that they were given the space to contribute without kind of interruption. So for me, it's always about the felt sense. I need to have that embodied learning. So then I got that, and then I thought, okay, so how do we now take this and make this part of our offer? Because on a values basis, it's aligned to where we are. On a kind of philosophical basis, it's in the right space. It fits very comfortably with things, you can map things like strengths and transactional analysis across to it. You can map the whole piece around empowered teams and, all of that stuff to it. So it was a good fit for our stable. It was it complemented what we were doing, but it also ended up kind of almost being an umbrella for a lot of the other methodologies and frameworks that we had in place. So that's kind of what and who brought me to it. And I think if I hadn't had that felt sense, had that experiential learning of what generative conversation can do, then I don't think I would have gone forward with it. I can learn lots of things cognitively and think, oh, that was interesting, okay, but for me, it's the embodied sense that really mattered.
Yeah. And I think I experienced that when I went on a program with you. It does make you feel something. It is very positive and very constructionist. And for me, it felt there was theory there. There was a theory of change, but it was also very relationship driven. That's what I came away feeling. And I think we all know that unless you feel a little bit of discomfort with the current circumstances, and you also focus very much on the strength of the relationships, nothing changes. So for me, that's what I took away from the program. That idea that we can, by having powerful conversations, by connecting with people, by constructing a new version of what we want to achieve, we can begin a process that leads to really important transformation. So yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for summing that up, Fiona. That's really interesting. Summary of how you got here and who brought you to Appreciative Inquiry. So the next obvious question then is kind of what change have you seen Appreciative Inquiry deliver either for people, teams, or for organisations?
So I think, it's a massive, massive question, and there are a variety of examples. So maybe I could just pick something current. So from September 2020 to December 2020, I had the opportunity to facilitate a personal leadership programme for 60 occupational therapists who were working at the front line in health and social care partnerships across the west of Scotland. And the underpinning frame for this programme was around creating space. So this is also what Appreciative Inquiry has been able to do in a pandemic, I guess, and we might come back to that later. But yeah. So take the context of these 60 OTs at the front line, being redeployed, having their professional identity questioned, being told they have to go and do care at home stuff, all kinds of things that not only do they not know how to do, but they're feeling are not really their role. And an opportunity comes along for them to do a 12-week leadership programme. And there was only a finite number of places. And this was sponsored by a charity, the Elizabeth Casson Foundation Trust. So Appreciative Inquiry is fundamentally a series of powerful questions. And these powerful questions have a pattern and a rhythm to them. So there are some that come before others. And in the front end of Appreciative Inquiry, you have this phase called the discovery phase, which very naturally puts you as the facilitator in the place where you say, I don't know anything and you know everything, because this is about your lived experience whatever you are. So in this case, it was occupational therapists at the front line during a pandemic. In 2019, it was a group of frontline guys in North Ayrshire Council working on digging graves, taking the bins out, cutting the grass. So the lovely thing about Appreciative Inquiry is it doesn't care where you are in the hierarchy. It absolutely values your story, 100%. And I think what's interesting in a health environment, and I'm teaching my grandmother here, is, of course, there's a lot of espoused values around the importance of lived experience and the importance of patient story, client story, service user story. So it has a good fit. Of course, we also understand that doesn't always play out in the big machine that is the NHS, and you and I both know that. So we've got these 60 occupational therapists, and in the first instance, what we're doing is saying to them, when you think about how you've been able to lead during the pandemic, what do you feel proud of? So not what's been really hard, what have the barriers been? And that's not diminishing that those are there, and we get to that, but what do you feel proud of? And then everybody has a space to tell their story. So you're creating space. And in that discovery space, very often what you hear from people, irrespective of if it's senior people in strategic positions or frontline people or anybody in between, I'm not sure if this is what you were looking for, but and it takes a wee while just for people to understand, in this concept, in this lens, you're not looking for anything except their story. Because, of course, we're educated with right, wrong, good, bad, acceptable, not acceptable, which, of course, is highly unhelpful in the relational world that we, as you mentioned, socially construct with others. So in the first instance, what these OTs told us at the end of this 12-week programme was that one of the unique things was that they had the space to tell their story about what was working. And because they were asked about what was working, they were able to see it. And then we said to them, okay, what's stuck? So we didn't say it's all about, it's all roses round the door and we've got Julie Andrews singing to us. We didn't do that. For those of you who are watching this and you don't know, Julie Andrews was in a well-known musical called The Sound of Music.
Get up on the internet, yeah.
Yeah, so we didn't do that. But what we said was, okay, so we've noticed now what was stuck. Let's just hold that there, and make it small, but we know it's still there. So we're not wiping it. It's not Pollyanna-ish. It's not pretending everything's okay. And I do get really frustrated with people who think that's what Appreciative Inquiry is about, because that's airport trainers. That's people that have picked up a book in their airport and are facilitating the session the next day. They've got no idea what it's really doing. So it created that change for those individuals. Then what we did was we asked those individuals to go away and conduct a mini appreciative inquiry with their team using the same questions. What have you felt proud that you've been able to achieve during the pandemic? What got stuck? What if you could do more of what you were proud of? What ideas have you got that could make that part of what we do moving forward? And then what are the actions that we take? And that's the other thing about Appreciative Inquiry. As you go around that cycle, and as you guys are listening to this, of course, you've had the introduction from me about Appreciative Inquiry and the mechanism in advance of this conversation with Warren, so you know what I'm talking about. So as you go around and you come to Destiny, what a lot of people don't understand is that's just the place where you do your action planning. So most people in big systems are really good at that. But what they do is they go from what's stuck to the action plan. So the quality of the thinking is poor, because it's the thinking that's at the front of the head, which has been sitting there for months or years, or the way we've done it. Whereas Appreciative Inquiry just presses that pause button and says, help me to understand what you're proud of. What does it feel like to have made a difference? What have you learned that's been so really important to you? And one young HP said, you know, I was told that I was redeployed to go out and work with care teams. And these are usually people that, you know, we defer tasks to as occupational therapists. And I went out and I suddenly realised I had no idea what it was like to do the role that they did. Mm. So I'm able now to bring that to myself and to have a great deal more empathy and compassion for them, which will change the way I will function with them forever. Mm. So there's a change that has happened because people were given the opportunity to lay their thinking out in front of them and make sense of it for themselves.
Yeah.
Because most of the conversations that happen in big organisations are, how are we going to do this? How are we going to fix this? And it's all talking about action. It's not thinking about feeling and about engagement and relational stuff. So they went away and conducted an appreciative inquiry with their teams, and that made a difference to their teams who felt they'd been heard. And then on an organisational context, if I said to you that 3 of the organisations where these individuals came from have already reached out and said, can we do some of this work with you? Because we see the difference in Betty. We see the difference in Betty's team. So that's a current example of kind of how it's worked in the pandemic. It's created space for people. And because you've got a pattern of questions and they've got a rhythm, that enables you have a loose frame. So it's very much, it's not like let's sit and talk and have a talking shop for hours on end and nothing happens. So, but neither is it about, we'll come to a meeting and I'll pretend I'm interested in what you're doing. So there is a membrane that holds that space, which is different than a tin box that often holds meeting type conversations in organisations.
It's a great summary, Fiona. No, it's a great example, and I'm thinking all the time when you're talking about parallels between your work and my work, and I think you're right. In the NHS, for example, in healthcare, in lots of professions, we're trained to identify the problem and decide how we're going to treat it or fix it, with not a lot in the middle. And what I like about the appreciative inquiry approach is, do you give people the opportunity to appreciate what's positive, what's good, what can be built upon, but it's all done in the context of relationships, and that's the part that I think is really powerful. It's a relationship-driven approach, and ultimately, that structure allows people to feel like there's some framework around it, doesn't it? There's some framework for change. It's not just, like you say, it's not just, oh, we're going to have a nice chat. There is actually a product, it produces change as a consequence of it. So that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with me. And I think particularly at times like we're in at the moment, I think those opportunities to connect are so crucial, and the feeling of being aligned, with our colleagues, with our friends, with our families, with our organization, because ultimately most people and most employers can tell you what they do and how they do it. But it's only when you connect again with why you're doing what you're doing that you feel that passion again, for what you signed up for in the first place. So I think that was a really good example, good illustration of how that's happened. So you touched a little bit on, sometimes people may have resistance to this because they think, well, there's so many problems. You just want to talk about the positives, So how do you navigate that resistance, Fiona? Tell me a bit more about that.
So that's all kind of situationally specific, I guess, Warren. So as a facilitator, you're always, as you know, you're responding to what's in front of you. So you might get a very assertive, extroverted person. So I might be faced with myself on the other side of the table saying, yeah, but you know what? I've got all of this to deal with, and you're asking me to make a collage about the future out of coloured paper. I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm a senior manager.
Yeah,
exactly, and that's exactly why you should be doing it. However, that's not exactly how I would respond to it. So I think it depends how it comes at you. So if I can give you an example, in May. in May 2019, we had the opportunity to conduct a large-scale appreciative inquiry with around 150 people from commercial services in North Ayrshire Council. And it was all around, how do people identify with the idea of culture? So you had the director in the room, and you had the guy who worked part-time digging graves, or on the bin lorry, or filling holes in the road, and all the engineers and all the stuff. So a real cross-section. And that's the other thing about appreciative inquiry. It works best when it's got the whole system in the room. So everybody that's part of this, not the whole, because obviously you can't get 7,000 people in a room, but a representation of the system, that is really, really important. Because often what happens is the director doesn't hear the story of the guy at the front line because he's too far away, or she's too far. So, you've got an antennae if you're a facilitator, and I've been in this game for 30 years and I'm pretty intuitive. So you can tell, they're coming through the door, they're picking up their cup of coffee, and you're thinking there's a fair amount of them here that would rather be anywhere else but here. So sometimes the best way to do it is you just meet it head on. So I just said, okay, so just a show of hands, once I've said hello and blah, 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 a show of hands for those of you that would rather be anywhere except in this room right now. And then you get a show of hands. So you've got 25% maybe on this particular day. And then what you're able to do is appreciate them by saying, thank you for your honesty. That really matters to me. And I'm not going to apologise for the fact that you're here, because you are here and you're taking your money to be here, so you're not here on your own time. However, I'm going to come back at the end of the day and ask how many of you feel you wish you'd managed to get out of it at 9:15. So then you've laid down a line. And for me, the way that I work is it's always an extension of myself. So I'm not role-playing being somebody else. So that's exactly the kind of thing that I would do, as you know, because we know each other.
Absolutely. That sounds familiar, actually,
Yeah. So then you get that straight. So then all of a sudden people are thinking, okay, so maybe this is not somebody that doesn't really know anything about me or how I feel or whatever, just a person at the front, in their suit and their heels and all that jazz. Or you're round a table and you're holding that space and you're asking a question about what what do you feel proud of? And the person says, well, I'm not proud of anything I'm doing at my work at the moment because we've not got enough resources and we've not got this and we've not got that. Now, you've already set the rules of engagement that there's a series of inquiries that you're going to use and that you will bring people back from straying too far from that inquiry. So you do the, okay, Warren, so I can see that there's a lot of frustration. I remember doing my counselling training 100 years ago. I can see there's a lot of frustration. Can I just invite you to park that? And let's just park the work thing for the moment. So, what about outside work? What are you proud of? Have you got a family? Talk to me about that. And then you're off with the footy team or the looking after the aging parent or whatever. And then you can say, so what does it feel like for you when you feel that pride in something? Well, it feels like this. Okay, so can I just invite you to write that down in one of these wee post-it notes and hold it, just keep your hand on top of that for the next wee while. And then let's see where we get to. And maybe we can come back to you and maybe there's an example of a time when you felt proud of the work you were able to do for the council, even if it's not right now. So you've got the kind of full on, take it on, head on, big room stuff. And then you've got the much more holding the space reflective thing. And of course, mostly you don't get invited by strategic people because it's an expensive day to have 150 people in the room, 15 facilitators, all the resources that go with that. So mostly you don't get invited to do it if the people that are commissioning it don't already think it's a good idea because it's too much money. So you've kind of got that strategic buy-in, and often that comes with the relationship, the trust, and that actually the people that do that are comfortable enough that they don't know where it'll end up, but they know it'll end up somewhere better than it started.
Yeah.
That's kind of the thing about appreciative inquiry. It's a bit of a leap of faith. And, you know, the kind of, well, let's just see what happens. Let's see where we get to. And I can remember many, many years ago going back to Donata when we started working with open space technology, and Donata saying, look, whatever emerges in the room, Fiona, will be what needed to emerge. And I remember at the time thinking, what does that mean? I've got no idea what that means. And I remember saying to her, sorry, run that by me again, you know. But the more I worked in that way, the more I understood it isn't my job to do people's thinking for them. I can't fix organisations. I can't fix anything except myself. So the job I've got is to create space to enable thinking to come forward that has not come forward yet.
Yeah.
Because as Peter Senge would say, if it was so straightforward, they would have already done it. If it was so easy, they wouldn't need somebody to hold the space. And the thing about appreciative inquiry over that 15 years, whatever, that we've been playing with it, is my thinking around it has developed and emerged and deepened. And it's very much layered up now with the work of Nancy Klein around thinking environments. And that's just brought a whole other dimension to it. So it's not been a static piece. And very often, discovery questions are fantastic in things like clinical supervision and reflective practice. You know, so you don't need to eat the whole thing at once.
Yeah.
And you can run an appreciative inquiry for a whole day like we did with these guys from the council. Or it can be the model that we gave to the occupational therapist was 90 minutes. Now, if you told me in 2008 that I could get a good result out of a 90-minute appreciative inquiry, I would have told you to chase yourself, as they would say in Glasgow. But now I understand that it's got such flexibility. And of course you need to get fluent before you can actually start making up your own sentences. You know, that goes without saying with any new methodology. But once you've got a grip of it, it can just deliver for you all over the place. Yeah. And that's the thing I love about it. It never lets you down.
Thanks, Fiona. So you've given us some fantastic examples there of how you've managed resistance, both in the big room, by connecting authentically with people and acknowledging what they're feeling and what they're going through. I also think you acknowledge, with that example, you're also acknowledging the uncertainty. So we like to go from diagnosing the problem to knowing what the intervention is. That's kind of what we're good at. But we're less good at kind of holding that uncertainty. And I think that's where that discovery phase is really powerful in my experience, is that you just acknowledge that we might not have right now a clear idea about what the solutions are, about where we're going, but you trust the process, you trust the relationships. So I think that was a really powerful example, and one I relate to as well. So just to say thank you, Fiona, for sharing some of your insights. I know we could probably have talked, or you could probably have talked about appreciative inquiry for the next 3 hours. And we're all, I've learned a lot, being refreshed on the subject, and a lot of ideas are coming back to me, which I'm sure I'll pick up with you when we catch up next time. Well, for now, thank you for sharing your ideas and recollections about appreciative inquiry, and I'm sure people have found it fascinating. So thank you.
Thank you, Warren. I really appreciate it. And for anybody that's listening, I just look forward to you being in the room with us, and albeit that virtual room, it's going to be good fun, and I know you're going to be part of that, Warren, so I'm looking forward to that too.
It'll be a fabulous experience.
Thank you.